Hi, everybody. My name is Reese. I use they, them pronouns. I am the Events Inclusion Coordinator here at hireEZ. Super excited today to talk about advancing women equity in the workplace. Even though I don't identify as a woman, this is something that I hear all the time, especially for folks that also don't identify as women as well. But I think this panelist is amazing. They are all, and I will not cuss because I'll embarrass myself, but they are all great in their field, but there's a word that I would like insert instead. So without further ado, Sarah, you're like in my first little like Brady Bunch box. Will you go ahead and introduce yourself, what you do, and yeah, a fun fact about yourself? How about
a fun fact? Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Well, I'm Sarah Morgan. I'm the Director of Equity and Inclusion at hireEZ, where I work with small and mid-sized businesses on their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, as well as executive search. And fun fact about me is that I'm allergic to chocolate. I know, it always gets the people going. Yeah.
I'm so sorry for yourself.
I know. I don't know what I'm missing. I've been this way my whole life. I do occasionally like sneak an M&M or a chocolate chip. Kirsten can attest to that because she's seen me have allergic reactions when I've tried to sneak chocolate before. So yes, that's my fun fact.
Wow. Okay.
I have shocked Reese. We can just end the
that's it.
Thank y'all for comments. Good night, everyone. Like I just ended the whole
thing. That is insane. Oh, okay. That is a great interesting.
This is what happens when we don't practice our fun facts before.
Exactly.
Before we start.
Awesome. Not awesome, but okay, great. Kirsten, you're next too. Will you go ahead and introduce yourself and a fun fact about yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kirsten Greggs, the founder and CEO of Trap Recruiter LLC, and I do talent acquisition consulting, bridging the gap between job seekers and employers. Fun fact about me, I love jigsaw puzzles.
Oh, okay. Are you a puzzle person just in general, or is it jigsaw puzzles are like your only go-to?
Jigsaw, logic. Those who follow me on social media know I do the Wordle every day. I do all the other ones too, but I don't share them anymore because my timeline was looking very lonely. Like I had no life. So I do other things, but yes, I do all of the puzzle, the online puzzle game. Sarah and I have one that we do together, a waffle every day.
Daily waffle.
Waffle. Yeah, so that's that.
That's amazing. And last but certainly not least, Brenda, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and a fun fact?
Hi, my name is Brenda Milian. I've been an in-house HR manager for various companies for about 10 years now, doing recruiting as part of that the whole time. Fun fact about me, I would say, I really love dogs. I just got a puppy not too long ago. He's a rescue. It's called a coated Zolo. So it's a Mexican hairless dog, but he has hair. Super adorable. So that's been fun.
Oh my God. Okay, so I live in a house with 5 dogs, and clearly you saw my cat. So like you'll have to send me a picture of your dog because I'm gonna go crazy over them. Okay, awesome. So we're gonna get into it. Just some little ground rules, like I usually say. If you have a question, please put it in the question and answers function. It's a little hard when you put it in the chat because we're going to save all the questions for at the end. If you don't have questions, I can't call on you because you were, on the participant side of things, so I can't do that. But please, if you have any questions in the middle of it, put it in there, or you can message me privately myself. So we are going to kick it off. Okay, so the first kind of like question, or kind of want to lay the ground rules of trying to figure out all of this stuff is I'm just going to popcorn it. So I'll start with you, Kristen. So what are some of the common challenges women talent face in today's job market?
Pay equity, having access and opportunities to a wide variety of roles outside of those that are typically the ones that you would see women in, like the ones that we're in. I think most of us have an HR and or recruiting background. And as you know, those are heavily women. There are challenges with, because of the way things have been historically, women sometimes won't apply for roles if they feel like they don't check every single box in the requirements. So, I know you've spoken with Kat before about job postings and some other things that could be fixed. So yeah, there are a great number of things, but I don't want to take too many of them because I know there are other panelists here that want to weigh in.
Sarah, Brenda, one of you two can jump in as well too. If you want to add anything, feel free to.
Yeah, I would add not being viewed as leadership ready in applying for positions based on typically language that we use in the resumes. Like we find that women tend to use softer adjectives and verbs to describe the things that we've done, and then we get judged for that. And we have this kind of balance of relatability and likability that we have to navigate from the moment we apply for jobs. Like it's not even something that we just deal with when we actually get into positions. It's something that we have to deal with from the application process, that while you have to look like you're a leader, you also can't look like you're bragging or you're power hungry. Like we have to walk that tightrope from the very moment that we begin to engage in the job seeking process. And then I would also add that I don't think women receive the same grace on job gaps that we see with our male counterparts. Women who take time off for their own illnesses, time off to be caregivers, when time off for birth of children, we don't see the same great, even those women who face layoffs and things during the pandemic. I can remember working with the hiring manager, and there was a woman laid off early in the pandemic, and it took her about a year, to find another position. And I remember submitting her resume and having a hiring manager say to me, "Oh, well, what was she doing? Making sourdough bread?" And it's like, are you serious right now? Like, we're in the middle of the pandemic. There are so many things that people are going through in those moments. And for you to reduce this woman to, a meme essentially in that moment is just ridiculous. So I think that those are some other challenges that we see with women in the talent acquisition space as well.
Sort of what I would probably add to that is just an extension of traditional roles that have traditionally been male roles. There's different industries, think of like more industrial manufacturing type industries where there'd be certain hiring managers, they're like, no, I wouldn't even interview a woman for this position. Mm-hmm. But there's many women that are more than capable, willing, and able to do those roles. And so sometimes it's from within the organization, even being willing to get those hiring managers to start considering those applicants. And another thing that can kind of be a double-edged sword that I found with women candidates is sort of this reliance on network and internal referrals. As you're trying to get positions filled, those can be really great, but at the same time, it does end up kind of just perpetuating the same type of demographics that you already have, and doesn't necessarily always lead to more women candidates.
Go ahead. You don't have to raise your hand. You can just speak.
Well, I'm very polite.
You are.
Oh my goodness. I just said that on a hot mic, and that's going to be a meme tomorrow because I am not. Anywho, so one thing I did want to highlight that both Sarah and Brenda so expertly said is that, while we are in recruiting and we are in HR, both of them highlighted some experiences they had with hiring managers or with leaders in the organization saying things that are like cringe, like don't do that. And another drawback or another challenge that we have is those of us that are in these positions, like we get exhausted with pushing back, we get exhausted with, being the only, being the first, being one of two or three at the most. And, try kind of straddling that line of being tokenized and all that stuff, and we get tired, and then sometimes we remove ourselves from those organizations, we remove ourselves from those situations, and then it's and then the cycle just continues, because the next woman that comes into the role, or the next woman that applies for the job, goes on and experiences those same things that we never got to solve, not because we didn't try, but because we just got exhausted, and that's a big thing. It's a challenge for both sides of my business, as an internal or in-house recruiter and as a career coach, trying to talk to women about how to approach and go after getting new roles. So yeah, I found that both Brenda and Sarah mentioning these situations, I was like, yeah, and then what do we do with that?
Yep. And do you think when it comes to, applying for, like, I think you mentioned before too, about when applying for roles, people are always like afraid of like, oh, it's more, they always put in like 5 to 10 years plus experience, or like 10 to 20. Do you think that usually always stops people, women specifically for this, women stopping themselves and be like, oh, I don't have that experience, but in reality they do? What are some things that y'all see when it comes to job, job descriptions that have kind of been like, this isn't inclusive for, number one, women or anybody in general?
Oh, for sure. Women and people of other marginalized identities absolutely feel like, because we're conditioned to this idea that we have to be perfect, and we have to check every single one of the boxes. It's that conditioning that you have to be twice as good to get half as much, right? And so we're incredibly hesitant to apply for roles if we don't feel like we match all of the requirements for the position. So we self-select out of opportunities before we ever have the chance to be considered and to allow someone else to potentially reject us. Whereas in most cases, our male counterparts, particularly our white male counterparts, are much more willing, apologies for my barking dog, are much more willing to, seriously, Liam, I'm out here pontificating and he's just barking away. Yes, but are much more willing to shoot their shot. Let me mute myself while he barks at the homeschool children riding their bikes on their lunch break across the street.
And as I move my cat out of the way too. Yeah. Go ahead, Brenda.
Yeah, I think another way in which job descriptions can kind of dissuade people is just making everything a requirement that really isn't. It's like, well, yes, it'd be nice to have, all this previous industry experience or whatnot, but is it absolutely necessary? That's one of the things that I've sort of noticed it's a challenge. We talked about traditionally women industries that are more service oriented or whatnot, and then someone who's trying to make that switch from that to maybe the tech industry or medical or something that has higher wages. There's this preference for, well, we want someone who already has industry experience, and then it just kind of keeps the same people in the bubble. And so I think not being afraid to, apply for things that you may be outside of what your previous industry has been in, because good organizations, I think, are trying to be more creative and, looking at different backgrounds and seeing, okay, how can we make it work, rather than, what are the barriers that we're going to put up.
That's a great point about industry and crossing over from one to the other. I too experienced that. I've been recruiting since 2000, and I started in defense and intel, and most of my career was there. But when it came time to look for a job outside of defense and intel, despite the accomplishments I had, the achievements that I had, like I was recruiting for like people with the highest level clearances from the C-suite down to entry level, and it was hard for me to convince tech companies or to convince commercial companies or banking even that I was able to recruit inside of their organizations, even though I had recruited for those types of positions. The fact that I didn't have industry experience was seen as a mark against me or seen as a bad thing. And I know that happens a great deal even now. I mean, we're in a great situation now. People have spent 2 years learning new skills, doing what they really want to do, and I'm excited for them. But we're still putting up barriers for someone who's an educator who wants to move into tech, or for a journalist who wants to move into tech, or someone who wants to get out of healthcare and go into something else. So we're still doing it, and that's another challenge for me and for job seekers.
Yeah, and one more thing to add to that I see with people who are moving is this idea that then you have to be willing to start from the bottom and potentially take a pay cut. And considering that women on average are paid, what is it now, 70, like 80 cents, but then depending on which woman of color, on which of color you are, within that number drops significantly. So you were already, whatever industry you were in, you were likely already not being paid equitably. And then in order to make a move and make a change, you're now being asked to take a further step back and make even more distance in the equity, which then impacts your ability to be able to provide for your family, to be able to eat healthy and have healthy habits, to be able to pay your bills, which then causes stress, which then makes you not as focused and open to be able to produce at work. And it just perpetuates the cycle that women can't seem to get off this hamster wheel of workplace oppression, really.
Yeah, that's absolutely insane to even think about, like, because it makes me think of too, when it comes to jobs and everything, it's like, when people are applying, is it more white males that are applying to it in comparison to everybody else? Because, when, like, say if I were to look at a job and I'm like, oh, I don't have that 7 years experience, like I'm still kind of at the beginning of my career, I'm almost there, but taking that step forward, I'm like, oh no, I don't have that skill or that skill. So it's like, oh, I shouldn't apply to it. But then there's people that are like, nope, I'm going to apply to it no matter what. I think that's definitely something that's always like a scary factor in reality too, of realizing that like you do have the skill and you can do that. And it's just like, go for it if you can, for sure.
But what's interesting about that is that you'll find with male candidates in the same predicament, they are quick to say, I can't support myself, I can't provide for my family if I, take this large of a pay cut, and that they're given consideration as it relates to that. And sometimes you will find even that hiring managers or whoever is in charge of hiring will make that assumption for them. Like, oh, this person probably has a family, and so we have to make sure. You don't know nothing about them. You don't know their life. You don't know what's going on in their house, but you created this narrative. And a lot of times it's because you see it's that bias where you see yourself in the other individual. And so if you are a man who does not have strong women in their life, who does not have career women in their life, who didn't have teachers, coaches, other, women in leadership around them as you were coming up, you don't have that frame of reference. And so you don't connect to women candidates in the same way. And then you automatically put them into the bucket of mom or wife or some other kind of bucket, but you don't see them as a leader. You don't see them as a provider, even though in a lot of cases, those are the things that they're required to do in their homes and their households. And so it just, again, you get on this hamster wheel for women, and we just can't seem to get off and to move ahead.
Also, I know why your dog was barking in the background. He was doing like snaps for you.
Snaps.
Because I mean, even with that, like what you just said too is like so true. And it's so unfortunate that it's seen that way and so frustrating at the same time too.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move on to the next question. What are some strategies and strengthening inclusivity for women in the workplace? I know like with the way that I identify, they're like, oh, we have like a pride ERG, we have different ERGs. What kind of best practices, or what do you think is the best way to make sure that you're retaining women in your organization, number one, but making sure you're still supporting them internally as well too? Anybody can go. I won't pick this time if anybody wants to just speak up.
I'll start. I think not having things ready for women without having them ask for it. So thinking about, okay, we're really trying to hire women. Do we have a vactation room available? Should we provide period products, in the restrooms, and just things that send the message, we're thinking about your needs, as a woman in the workplace. And, it's just those kind of subtle things, I think sometimes that can really go a long way. And also just being upfront with it, as being within the organization, just being able to say, yeah, we don't have a lot of women. That's something we're really trying to work on. Tell us what we can do to make this better for you. And, one of the subtle things that kind of comes up is making sure that the few women in the office aren't doing the traditional women tasks. It's like if, so-and-so works in the accounting department, why are they the one that always does the lunches or something like that, and finding those areas where we can push back and say, well, does this really need to be done by this person, like according to their role and everything, or is it kind of it's defaulted because it's kind of the traditional woman's kind of work?
Oh, that last point you just made was such a trigger for me, because I remember not so long ago we had an all leadership staff meeting, and we were a pretty diverse leadership group in terms of people of color and men and women in this particular organization. And one of the VPs sent an email out asking for someone to volunteer to be the one to take the meeting minutes, and only sent it to the women executives. True story. Only sent it to the women executives. And I was like, are the rest of y'all's fingers broke? Like what happened? But yeah, and I don't work there anymore. But I will add to what Brenda just said. I will add the important, Reese, you touched on this, the importance of resource groups, mentorship, and sponsoring. And then I also think educating men on allyship. We really don't talk about that enough. Men are very handicapped in these areas, because they spend so much of their lives in this privileged kind of bubble of just walking through the world, existing, and not having to navigate, the same types of troubles that we go through. And you really have to work hard to help them unlearn a lot of those habits, and bring to their awareness the ways that they can be more gender inclusive, more racially and ethnically inclusive, in the ways that they go about things. Because also, to Brenda's point, there are so many things that we do, the way that we set up, like even things like the games and stuff that we put in our offices are not super gender inclusive things. It's usually, ping pong and pool and things that again are traditionally male. I remember Natalie Egan, who's a transgender woman and a tech founder, saying that we take frat boy mentality, remix it, and call it corporate culture. And that's what happens in a lot of startups and organizations, and it just keeps remixing itself. And there's so much more to life, and to work, and to the way that we socialize as colleagues and teams and partners, than that. And so I think the more that we're able to educate men and to remove that remix, the better off that we'll be.
Just to add on, I do think it has to start before they get hired. There's stats that say that the likelihood of a woman being selected for a role increases based on the number of women who are part of the interview panel. So if you, yeah, and like significantly. So it has to start there. If you're interviewing a CEO, a potential CEO, and everyone in the room, no one in the room presents the same as that woman, you can't then turn around and say confidently that you're engaged and that you are, trying to fill this role with a woman, because you're not. If you were, you would have included other people. And there needs to be other touch points as well. The ERGs, as all of you have said, but don't wait till people are leaving to figure out and try and retain them. And that's another problem that we have. We don't believe women. I'm not trying to get all Me Too on us, but we don't believe women when they tell you that, something rubs them the wrong way, or something is offensive, or they're being discriminated against, or they're being, oppressed in some way, they're being harassed. We don't believe them sometimes, or we say, oh, are you sure?
I didn't mean it.
They were just joking. Okay, fine, but your impact is greater than what your intention was. Sarah taught me that, and I need you to fix this. And a lot of times we don't fix those issues. We don't address them. We won't have courageous conversations. We won't have honest conversations, and we don't try. And sometimes that's all it takes. It's just you saying, you know what? I recognize that this is a problem, and I'm going to try. I think that goes a long way. I know it does for me, that it goes a long way when someone says, you're right, we have a long way to go, but we're trying, and here are the things that we're doing.
Yeah, I feel like that's, because whenever you're interviewing with someplace, it's sometimes people will are afraid to ask those like demographic questions, like, oh, like how many people are like this percent like identified this way, like what kind of, do you have employee resource groups, do you have any type of like, even for me, like healthcare, when it comes to being trans, like what kind of stuff
Gender
for
affirming
me in
care.
order.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to ask questions like that to just make sure that like, number one, you're going to a space that like, number one, cares about you. You're not just like checking a box and being like, oh yes, Reese, they are Black, trans, and non-binary. Boom, we're good. Like stock photo right there. I think it's so important to like, especially for women going into tech or any kind of career field or anything like that, to ask those questions, because half the time you get into the organization and you're like, oh, this is not it for me. Like it's not good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's super important to like, even though you're afraid to ask those questions, to ask them, because like your liveliness, your mental health during the workspace matters way more than, them and what they're trying to do and everything like that.
And be on the lookout when they don't want to give you the answer to those questions, or they tell you they don't collect that data, or they tell you they don't share that data. But like I said, their website says that they are a inclusive environment where everyone feels welcome, or they give you all these. Oh, we just like everybody to just get along. Mm-hmm. Like, no thanks.
That ain't it.
Move on. And unfortunately, recruiters are told that they can't say certain things, or they can't answer certain questions, or they need to direct them to, it's in certain instances, I do think it's important to direct people to a more subject matter expert on certain topics, especially during the recruiting process. Now, that's a difference between me saying we don't collect that data, or I'm not going to give you that data, I'm not allowed to give you that data, or I don't know anything about that, we don't do that. When I'm saying that, I mean, it's like when someone is asked, I've had questions about, what what, outside of those two little sentences on a benefits overview about, the help that we give for, say, fertility treatments and things like that, or family leave, and me, you know, having to direct any personal or any like very serious questions to someone else and say, you know what, I'm not the best person to answer that. But at the end of the day, the goal should be to give the job seeker, to give the candidate, to give the employee an answer to the question.
I love it. And since we were talking about recruiting, this is kind of like regarding recruiting a little bit. What are some ways that y'all use to like find and hire women for a more equitable workplaces? Is there anything, that you're kind of looking for when you're like sourcing, recruiting, anything like that? Or like, how do y'all usually approach it? And I'll like leave this question open up to all of y'all.
I can go first. One of the things that has been really helpful is finding local organizations that cater to women, helping find jobs. I've worked with a few sort of charities to help with that. Other groups also are for more like technical positions. The universities have been a great resource. They will often have like, women in STEM and clubs like that. And so making more, just doing more research to find those resources locally has been really helpful. And then reaching out to the women that you do have on staff and, helping them, sort of get referrals from them. Oftentimes that's been a way higher selling point, is having another woman say like, yes, this is a great environment. I'm not treated poorly just because I'm a woman. And so often that is really a great endorsement when you're trying to recruit and talk to someone else.
Another thing I would add is if you are in talent acquisition, I think the stats right now are something like it's over 50%. I'm guessing closer to somewhere between 60 and 70% of positions are being filled by referred and sourced candidates over natural applicants. And so it becomes very important, if you are someone responsible for sourcing, that you are intentional about making sure that your sourcing pipeline is being filled with diverse talent, that you are intentional about looking for women, that you're intentional about looking for people of color. And if you are responsible for setting kind of the talent strategy for your organization, that you really put, particularly if you're one who's advocating about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization, that you're putting measures in place that says that we won't go forward with the hiring process until we're able to achieve a diverse slate of candidates. And there are very few organizations willing to put that line in the sand, because we get concerned about who's going to do this work, if this position, while this position is vacant, and so on and so forth. And this idea that somehow, women and people of color are like hiding in bushes and can't be found when it's time for them to be hired for positions, which is just simply not true. So I would say that, that would be the other thing, is just making sure that you're being intentional about how and where you're sourcing, to make sure that your pipeline is representative of diversity, particularly of the diversity of the communities and where you live, and representative of the community that you want to see in the place where you live. If it's, it's one thing, there are some people who, you may not have very many women or very many people of color who are in that particular field. Well, okay, fine. You may have to dig a little deeper, work a little harder to find them. But then the question becomes, what are you as an organization doing to make sure that that doesn't continue to be a problem? How are you supporting education into this field, access into this field, creating your own pipeline, creating the opportunity for people to enter into this arena so that this doesn't continue to be something that we're talking about 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now.
I don't have much to add because I think you guys covered everything, but I do want to just reiterate that you do have to look outside of your quote unquote traditional things. I mean, we're talking about increasing the pipeline and increasing the representation in positions and in industries where the diverse candidates, women, non-white people, were historically excluded. So there, you can't just go on the internet and look for a person. You can't just go to the same 4 colleges or the same technical school or call the same 3 former employees and say, hey, do you know anyone? Or reach out to the same ecosystem of people who are already in your company. Hey, do you know someone? Because they likely have a similar network, I'll say, to what already exists in the organization. So you have to do the work. You have to try non-traditional things. You have to go outside. And then, to be frank, you have to relax your requirements and say what is really needed. Now, I'm not saying like you're going to hire a chef when you really need a doctor. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that some skills are transferable, and we need to understand that, and we need to have a little bit more grace and levity for those things.
Sorry, I did want to add one more thing, that there's some policies that really will just prevent people from applying. Like the one that jumps out is PTO policy, whether that's not having enough or it accrues very slowly, over a year or whatnot. It really can cause a lot of problems for women who might need that flexibility sooner or can't afford to take unpaid time off. So there's times where there may be other policies that maybe on the surface don't seem like they may immediately impact recruiting or the candidates you're getting, but some of those things can be deterrents for people just right away.
I can't agree more with that, Brenda. Thank you for saying that, because particularly, and Reese, you mentioned this earlier, when you're looking for positions that are mid-level, director level, senior level positions. I've been working in my industry 5, 10, 15 years. Ain't no way I'm coming in and waiting a year to get your raggedy PTO. It's not happening. It's not happening. And so I agree wholeheartedly, and putting the onus on candidates to negotiate, to be able to do those things, to be able to get more PTO, more flexibility in their schedule, whatever the case may be. That's not our responsibility. Everyone isn't taught to negotiate in the same way, particularly those of us coming from traditionally marginalized identities. We're discouraged from negotiating because it's this whole pick me mentality. And once you get picked, you take what it is that you're given, put your head down, go to work. And so we don't approach that in the same ways. Organizations have to be smarter, they have to be more savvy, they have to be more graceful, and they have to be more progressive and forward thinking in terms of the ways that they open up to candidates to meet their needs, even when they don't necessarily ask for it. And in that same vein, there goes pay equity. Because again, we talked about, Kirsten put it in the chat, with women on average making 83 cents on the white male dollar. Well, if I'm already underpaid, and then I'm coming to your organization and I'm only asking for $5,000, $10,000 over where I am right now, and you know that the rest of the people in this position who more than likely are male are making more than that, but you're just going to let me take this money because it's all that I asked for and it saves you on the budget. We have to get away from that mentality. We just have to get away from that mentality because it continues to perpetuate the problem. It continues to take advantage of people. It continues to put women and people of color and those of us from other marginalized identities on our heels and constantly trying to play catch up in the wealth gap, which then impacts our economy and so many other areas. And we have the power and the resources to be able to stop it. And the organizations who are going to survive and thrive as we move into the future and we see this new industrial revolution start to come to play are going to be the ones that are willing to embrace that flexibility and that progressiveness.
To your point, I already have a question. So when it comes to like the 83 cents for all women for every $1 for a white male, do you ever think that's going to ever match up where it's just everybody gets paid equal, or do you think it's going to stay like this for eternity?
Well, they're saying it's going to be 2059 when we reach pay equity.
Oof. At the pace we're on right now. Yeah.
And it's gotten worse. Just in a year, I know we talked about this offline when we were preparing, like how far out some of the individual, women's equal pay days are, not the all women, but for Black women, for Latina women, for Native women, for Pacific Islander women, Asian women, like how far out those are. And in some cases, just from 21 to 22, it's months. It's a few more months that we've added, that we've increased that gap. And that's ridiculous.
Yeah, we're going in the wrong direction.
Definitely.
As far as that, because initially when we first started tracking pay equity, it was closer to like 2040, 2045. And so now we've pushed that even further out and we're just chasing this never ending deadline.
And do you think COVID definitely had an impact with that of chasing the pay equity?
I absolutely think that it did, because we saw and we saw lots of articles and lots of conversation about women in particular having to exit because of children being home from school and them, home or in school remotely, and them having to step away from work or reduce their work or, whatever the case may be in order to be caregivers for their children, in some cases caregivers for their aging parents and relatives. And so that's that role still in most demographics of society still falls to the woman. And so once you get off that track, now it's like, aha, I got you again. When you try to get back into the workforce, they expect you to not to pick up where you left off, but somehow you've been out of the workforce for a year. And so we are gonna, start you off $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 less. And the gap just keeps widening. And candidates do it to themselves as well. I have had conversations with candidates that's like, well, because of COVID, I was dealing with this, dealing with that, and I had to take a year off. I had to take, 6 months off because I was dealing with XYZ thing. So I understand if I can't get paid, don't do that. Like, don't knock yourself out of that contention already. And particularly at hireEZ, the companies that we work with, when we say this is the range, this is the range. And so we don't care if you're making below what the range is. This is the range. And so we're very committed to ensuring equity in that way, that we're not even asking about what prior salary and those sorts of things. This is the range. Is there a number within this range that you cannot accept below? Is this range acceptable to you? If the person is making more than the range, we're talking to hiring managers about how we find wiggle room, but we're never going backwards, because that has to be the mentality that this is what we pay for this position. That has to be the mentality that we embrace.
Yeah, I think more companies are adopting the stop. Well, I'm hoping they are. Stop asking what people are making. It doesn't matter.
And it's unlawful. It's becoming unlawful in several states. I want to say at least 13 or 14 now. And then you also have city ordinances within that, where you cannot ask what their prior earnings were, in terms of making those sorts of decisions. And so I think just adopting that practice, and particularly if you're in an organization that works, nationwide like we do, then it's just easier to just say, you know what, this is just how it is that we're going to do it, because that makes sure that we're also in compliance. But we have to get past the point where we're requiring the law to tell us what to do in order to treat people fairly, and then turning around and going, you know, why can't HR make it better? Like Kirsten, that was another offline conversation that we had. Like, we can't make it better because the organizations won't commit to it unless there is some sort of, unless you're gonna get sued or go viral. Organizations don't want to commit to that, and that just can't be, that can't continue to be the way.
Okay, that's just, ooh, if only we had more than an hour, this would be all.
I know. I'm gonna stop talking so we can get to these questions.
No, you're good. Okay, so we have about like 13 minutes left. We do have 3 questions. And for the people that submitted questions, I will not read off your name just for confidentiality. I always do it. So somebody asked, with so much fluidity on staff identifying, how do I even run stats to find out if man or woman or any marginalized group are lower paid or less likely promoted?
So what I do with the clients that I work with, there is, we will take surveys of the employees and have them self-identify. And in those self-identifications, we then start to group. We group power majority versus marginalized, so that we can just look at, your white male, cis, hetero, Christian, like all the normalized boxes, versus those who are traditionally marginalized. We look at salary across that. We will look at men, women. We will look at non-binary and other identities. We will look at, cis versus trans, hetero versus LGBT. Like, once you collect that data, you can slice it any way that you need to see where there may be inequity issues. The problem comes when you're afraid to ask the question, or, and this drives me crazy, that because it's not in your hireEZ system, you feel like, there's no way for me to capture that data, as if you can't customize fields in your hireEZ system, and as if we all don't use spreadsheets because the hireEZ systems sometimes ain't cutting it. So it really boils down to asking the employees for the demographics of the information, understanding the difference between power majorities versus marginalized identities, and looking across those groups to see where there may be problems. Where you see discrepancy, then you've got to dig deeper, because there may be a legitimate discrepancy. There may be a difference in education, a difference in tenure, legitimate reasons why someone is going to make more money than someone else who holds the same position, works within the same department, whatever the case may be. But you got to dig into the data to get there.
The only thing that I like to add to that, because I think that was perfect, is that, is that a lot of times we look at these stats and we look at them in a vacuum, and we don't look at them across the organization and providing balance. We only look at them in their silo. So you will have all, so you could come away with, oh, we're doing great. We pay people equitably. Yeah, but all of your marginalized group, your non-power majority, are all centralized in one area at one level of the organization. So we have to look at that too. Like, why? What's the book? Why do all the Black kids sit together at lunch?
Like in the cafeteria. Yeah.
Like, why are all your females your women? Oh, Jesus! They gonna kick me off the internet again. Why is everyone from one group, in one profession or at one level? Because you won't achieve true equity without accounting for those things.
Awesome, love it. We won't kick you off the internet because I'm here, so it's fine.
Thank you.
Of course. The next question, I think we have time for. Yeah, we have time. this is basically like a statement, but they also asked a question at the end. I'd like to think everyone is treated fairly, but is it there on us to provide additional mentoring or opportunities to employees that may be marginalized and self-selecting out? How do we find these people?
I will go back to the statement I said earlier is that we're not hiding. We really aren't. When opportunities are presented for individuals to raise their hand and say, I would like to be mentored, I would like to be sponsored for to put myself on a track into leadership and management, you do not find that women and employees of color are like, nah, I don't want that. No, we're absolutely looking for people for someone to ask us. The problem truly is that so much of how we handle those processes in many organizations is not formalized. And so there is no opportunity. So the issue that we find and what the data says is that the issue actually is happening in reverse, is that there is no process. There is no way for me to say I'm interested in doing this, so that a conversation can happen about, here are the things that you need to learn, here are the people that you need to be connected with, here are the ways that you go about it, here are the types of behaviors, the types of achievements that we expect to see someone in order to put them on the track to do this thing, and then have the organization actually track those things and create succession based on achieving the things that they said to achieve. Instead, it's like, Ted is a rock star, and he's always at the happy hours, and he's the life of the party in the office, and I see something in him, and so I'm gonna give him a shot. Meanwhile, Kirsten, Brenda, myself, Reese are head down, grinding it out year after year after year, and just keep getting passed over. Like, that scenario is so much more common than the idea that anyone in this group is just sitting and not being asked if we're interested and then not expressing it. So I think you kind of answered the question in your question, is really creating those opportunities for individuals to raise their hand, and then creating the processes that go alongside that will allow them to select and be tracked and truly have those opportunities.
One thing I would add to that is, don't be afraid to go digging. I've had a lot of, leaders tell me as HR, like, well, don't start digging for problems. And I think sometimes we assume no news is good news. But if you're finding that you're having a lot of turnover with your marginalized groups, then there's probably something going on. And marginalized groups don't always feel safe going to HR or filing a complaint. And so sometimes it's on us to proactively go and seek out these people and say, like, how are things going? Like, are you being treated right? Is there anything I can do to support you? And, I know, at least in my experience, that is often, antithetical to what some of leaders want, because again, they don't want to sort of turn over stones. But I think that's what it takes if you really want to make sure that you're there for your marginalized groups, whether it's women or people of color, because they won't always feel comfortable calling the resource line or something like that.
Love that. Okay, last question, and we have 5 minutes left, which is ideal. Somebody is curious when it comes to outbound recruiting. So outbound recruiting involves messaging and engaging with prospects with opportunities. How do you communicate this type of insight into the outreach to those candidates? Oh, everybody stumped. I love this.
I guess maybe I don't understand fully the question. Is it more like how do we communicate that we're proactively seeking marginalized candidates or women candidates? Is that what that is?
Yes, I would say yes. That's kind of what the question is like meaning to be. Yes.
Yeah. So for me personally, I haven't had women specific sort of collateral that goes out, but it is, well, are the people in your pictures that you're using, are they people of color? Are they women? Are they different peoples of different body sizes and abilities? Or when you're even just emphasizing flexibility in schedules and hybrid and very generous PTO, those kinds of things that a lot of times women are looking for, and opportunities for internal advancement. And we didn't really get to touch on that, but even just having internal groups to help people develop those skills. If you've never, unless you want to go get an MBA, where are you going to learn to become a manager? And being willing to have those programs and being upfront that yes, we're willing to help you develop those skills within the organization. I use those to just, I guess, appeal to women without necessarily saying, this is specifically for women, which I don't know, it's probably may or may not be a great thing.
Yeah. And what I would add too is I think it's important when the organization has missed the mark and is trying to correct themselves or repair harm that they've caused in the past, that the organization be open and honest about that with candidates during that outreach process. I work with organizations doing executive search where they are specifically looking for a very specific demographic, whether it be a woman, a person of color of a specific race, ethnicity, whether they're looking for wanting to intentionally hire someone who is trans, whether they're intentionally wanting to hire someone who may have, a specific sort of lens on mental health, whatever the case may be. Being open and honest with candidates about that during your outreach and the reason why you're doing that and what the organization has done to kind of prime its environment to be ready to welcome you and support you and continue to build upon the momentum that you hope that this person is going to bring is also very important. So I think if you're doing outreach to individuals in the hiring process because you are trying to increase the diversity and the representation within your organization, it is important to be honest about that. And to Brenda's point, if you have changed things on your website to show that your organization is more inclusive, if you have changed things within your benefits to show more inclusivity, to increase the amount of time off they've had, to improve gender affirming care, to improve mental health care, to improve time off for rest and recovery and those sorts of things. If your organization has taken those steps in order to be a more gentle environment for people to come into, I think it's important to highlight that in your outreach because people are looking for that sort of insight into the culture of and what it's really like to work there. And you're missing an opportunity when you don't tell them that.
The last thing I'll add, 'cause I know we're out of time, is that sometimes it is cost prohibitive for some organizations to do a huge campaign in terms of attraction. But doing partnerships with organizations, whether they be community orgs or national orgs or local orgs that are designed for the type of demographic you're looking for. So like, I recently did something with Black girls in tech or Black women in tech in a particular area. And, a partnership is something where you can, you may not have to pay for it, but you may have employees who are Black women in your tech company who come and, provide mentorship to your to the people to the community that you're serving and things like that. You might set aside certain just certain positions or a certain number of roles, or you might open up your interview slate or be intentional about saying, hey, we want to interview some people from, that come from this group. You know, we've done it. We've been very successful. Like I said, I used to work in defense and intel. We were very successful doing that with veterans. You can partner with veteran organizations. You can do that with other organizations for other demographics as well.
And last thing. Okay, cool. Well, we're 2 minutes over, so everybody that's been saying thank you so much. This was amazing. I wish we could talk for like the rest of the day.
Yes.
But I seriously want to thank Kristen, Brenda, and Sarah for joining me on this. Like I said, we'll be sending a follow-up email with this recording, so feel free to share it out to anybody that missed it. And we have another event, I think, coming up sometime in September, but we don't have the date yet, but we will let you know. And thank you all so much for joining.